In at number 10 is Franklin Richards. As the child of two members of Marvel's first family, the Fantastic Four, Franklin Richards came to us in comic books as a baby. So, of course, he is going to change over time, but how drastically he has changed kinda surprised me. Given the nature of his reality warping abilities, Franklin has been shown to us as an adult before he had actually reached that age in the continuity. This happened a couple times. The first time he managed to age himself up to look like a blonde version of Jesus, which was hilarious and terrifying all at the same time. There was also a time he was abducted to the future and trained to become a powerful psionic hero calling himself Psylord, which is a stupid name. And yet another time was with Jonathan Hickman's Fantastic Four when future Franklin was traveling around time interacting with different members of his family, training his younger self, and making Galactus his little herald. The funny thing is that in all those appearances and versions of himself from child to adult, he has been blonde. Now again, his powers kinda mean that he can look whatever way he decides he wants to, but nowadays he's looking a hell of a lot more like his dad, Reed Richards, than he was before. In his teens, Franklin is sporting jet black hair, being super sulky like most teenagers are, and occasionally wearing an X-Men costume as his powers let him alter his own genes to give him an X gene since he believed that he was a mutant. It's a subtle change, but when I first saw him looking like this in the comics, I had no idea who I was actually looking at. He is also currently depowered as far as I know, which is a little upsetting, but also makes him no longer a mutant and just a depowered human mutate, so we shall see what happens there.
Number 9. Superman. Starting out with Superman for my first point here on this list, Superman made his first appearance in Action Comics issue number 1 back in 1938. He is one of the oldest characters around and one of the most prolific. Without Superman, the modern day superhero of today may not even exist. However, over the years he's come a long way. He even managed against all odds to settle down, get married, and have a son. That is a rare thing in comics where time often seems unmoving and endless. However, for Superman, almost nothing is impossible. The movement of life included apparently. Ending up with his love, Lois Lane, the two had a son together named John. Even when the continuity they were from came to an end, Superman and his family survived, carrying on despite the fact that he wasn't really the New 52 Superman at that time. Eventually, the New 52 Superman, who was romantically tied to Wonder Woman, would die and Superman from the New Earth would take his place. Although technically, Superman is now kind of a combination of both of those characters, which is kind of weird to think about because Superman and Wonder Woman were together, so what does that mean? Does he remember that? I don't know. Later, we'd get a glimpse into a possible future in Future State where Superman leaves Earth and his son John Kent takes up the mantle. Currently in the comics, John is Superman, with Clark having left Earth for a time, although don't worry, Clark Kent is also still Superman. When John was revealed to be bisexual, those who weren't following comics wrongfully assumed that DC had made Clark Kent queer when in reality, the Superman that was revealed to be bi was actually John Kent. This made crazy headlines, but I was also like, I don't think these people quite know exactly which Superman they're talking about. But on my end of the spectrum, I'm like, yay, more bi babes! Always love to see that representation myself. Also, John is just such a great character, so I'm happy to see him get a little bit more time in the spotlight. And friends, before I move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here on Top 10 Nerd, be sure to show us that you love us by clicking that like button.
In at number 8 is Star-Lord. When Peter Quill first appeared in Marvel Comics in Marvel Preview number 4 from January of 1976, he might as well have been a different character. The tagline on the front of the comic reads, "He stalks the galaxies, one man on a mission of cosmic vengeance." Now that's not really the Star-Lord we are familiar with today. There's also the fact that his look was reminiscent of Owlman from the Watchmen comics. Speaking of which, he actually had a pet owl. The comic, and by extension the character, was a lot more serious and fantastical. He also had actual superpowers bestowed by the costume he wore that was given to him by this guy called the Master of the Sun. He could fly without jet boots and in space without any protection. The main things that still remained were some parts of his origin story and the fact that he wielded an elemental weapon that could shoot fire, water, earth, and air, but only one. Now you contrast this character with what most people have come to be accustomed to, and there are many glaring differences. Not even physical differences, he's a hugely different character, which was probably also influenced by a bit of Chris Pratt's humor. But even in his first appearance with the Guardians of the Galaxy, he's starkly different to his Marvel Preview days.
Number 7. Crimson Avenger. Avenger. I mean, most people might not even recognize the Crimson Avenger just because they don't know him. He's quite a classic hero, appearing on what I believe was DC's second superhero team ever, the Seven Soldiers of Victory, which made their first appearance back in the early 1940s in Leading Comics issue number 1. Here, Crimson Avenger was Lee Walter Travis. He appeared here sporting a super form-fitting red outfit with a fin on top and yellow underwear over top, as well as yellow boots to match. This look would seemingly endure until Travis met his end in DC Comics Presents issue number 38. Here, the question of what happened to him would be answered, and we learn after being diagnosed with an incurable disease, Lee decided to don his costume one more time and sacrifice himself to save others. Now, while this might sound like his original costume because it did sort of come into play super early on, his original costume, however, actually hails from even further back than the 1940s. The Crimson Avenger actually made his first appearance in the late 1930s in Detective Comics issue number 20. Here, he sported a suit underneath a red cape with a matching red wide-brimmed hat and wielding dual pistols. He died back in the 80s looking very different in comparison to his first appearance, and I guess now you really wouldn't recognize him at all because I don't think we've seen a new Crimson Avenger since, with him remaining dead in regards to comic continuity. Tell me if I'm wrong on that one, but I can't think of a Prime Earth appearance that I've seen. Crimson Avenger? Is he in the Prime Earth? You tell me. Number 6. Robin. Jason Todd was once known as Robin. At the time, he was a hero, and while quite stubborn and brash, he did his best to live up to the mantle working alongside Batman. Eventually, however, Jason would end up leaving Wayne Manor and go on a search for his birth mother. During this time, Batman would once again find him just as Jason would find his birth mother. But unfortunately, the Joker would also find Batman and Jason, secretly blackmailing Jason's mother, and in the end, Jason and his mom would end up as the Joker's victims. Jason would seemingly not survive this incident despite Batman's rush to come to his aid. However, many years later, we learn with the re-emergence of Red Hood that Jason actually hadn't died here, but had managed to survive and return to life and later Gotham using his new identity, Red Hood. Gone are the days when Jason Todd acted as Batman's sidekick Robin, and in his place was Red Hood. At first a seeming villain, then an anti-hero who was unafraid to kill and fought with guns, and now currently a brutal vigilante who instead fights with a crowbar because symbolism. I actually really like Jason fighting with a crowbar, but I don't know, how do you guys feel about that? Number 5. Galactus. One villain who recently got a very mummy-inspired looking makeover was Galactus during his time in Thor's latest series as written by Donny Cates. Here in the first arc of the 2020 Thor series, referred to as Volume 6 overall of Thor, Thor takes on the immensely powerful cosmic entity known as the Black Winter. Because the Black Winter is so powerful, Thor is forced to team up with Galactus to defeat it. Unfortunately, he also learns that Galactus is actually kind of a herald for the Black Winter. FYI, that is just how powerful of a force the Black Winter is. He has Galactus as a herald. After devouring 5 planets to bolster his own power, Galactus has this power stripped from him by Thor upon this revelation. Thor leaves Galactus drained of the power cosmic, wrinkled, and de-armored, even taking Galactus's helmet as a trophy, using it as the entrance to his throne room. So while you might have recognized him previously, Galactus then got super upgraded and now is very mummified and also very dead. Oof. Number 4. Onslaught. Onslaught initially was a villain with a mysterious background. Despite the fact the powerful villain looked a ton like Magneto and seemed to pack a psionic powerhouse of abilities that echoed an evil Professor X, the character's true identity as really both of those mutants wouldn't be confirmed till after his initial appearance. When Onslaught appeared again, it was in a similar vein, and while the symbol of Onslaught might be similar, this time around when it came to the character's identity, they were even less recognizable, as it was explained that basically all the mutants of Krakoa were, in a way, Onslaught, and that Onslaught was able to exist through their constant resurrections. So while you might recognize the look of Onslaught when they returned, their true identity was even more of a mystery than the first time around, and their final form that we saw during X-Men The Onslaught Revelation was pretty wild as well, getting a bit of an update to match even the current character designs of what an amalgamated Charles and Eric would look like currently. I like that that version of Onslaught has like the black suit to now. The tight black suit that Charles wears. It's a look. Number 3, One Below All. I think one of the biggest revelations of modern comics was learning that even a being as good as the One Above All, who is basically considered to be like Marvel God, has a dark side. The One Below All ended up being a major villain in the Immortal Hulk series, and we later learned that their power actually came from one of the most divine and good beings in the Marvel universe, the One Above All. The One Below All is like the Hulk for the One Above All. In other words, their darker and much more destructive other half. So while you might know the One Above All and you might know the One Below All, I bet you'd be surprised to learn that they were actually directly connected to one another. They can't exist without the other, especially given how different in appearance and alignment they both are. But this revelation was also super powerful and fitting for a series that was really all about forgiving and reconciling the darker side of the Hulk, the Hulks, and ultimately of humanity and our own individual selves. After all, we all have like a little bit of a Hulk side to us. Number 2, Killmonger. If you go on far enough back, Eric Killmonger easily becomes one of Marvel's villains you would not soon recognize. And that goes both ways. Whether we're talking about more recent fans looking back in comic history to his first appearance in Jungle Action, volume number 2, or whether we're talking about his initial fans looking at his modern MCU adaptation and comic redesign, which obviously takes inspiration from the MCU version of Eric. Killmonger made his first appearance in the second volume of Jungle Action from the 1970s in issue number 6, and even from that front cover, he just looks like really different. Here, Eric does not sport any self-created bodily scars marking his kills, but instead comes with a lot of spiky accessories, including what appears to be a spike belt, which he uses as a weapon to fight against his foe and his rival, Black Panther. All the spikes. Now he's got scars, but back then he had spikes. Number 1, the leader. I doubt after all this time if the leader even really recognizes himself, considering what he looks like now. Following the events of Immortal Hulk, the leader is left no longer a supervillain, but just a guy. Throughout the course of the series, we saw the leader only grow more evil and more powerful, it seemed. He was eventually basically influenced or possessed by the One Below All, the most powerful of all Hulk-related baddies, and possibly the baddest of the bad just in general. However, after the two beings were separated from one another, Stearns was left as just a man, returned to normal. The Hulk decided to forgive the leader, and he returned back to the Earth with all the other Hulks and Bruce Banner. It's been a long time, but Sam Stearns is no longer the leader, at least not currently in the comics. I mean, he could return to being the leader at some point. Instead, Samuel Stearns is just Samuel Stearns. Number 10, Iron Man. I mean, Iron Man has come such a long way since that first classic appearance. He was basically just a guy in a big metal silver suit after all. Now he's a guy in, well, a big metal silver suit that isn't quite so bulky and actually has a few coats of paint on it. This is because when we first met Tony Stark as Iron Man, he was wearing his very first suit, in issue number 39 of Tales of Suspense. Here, we'd get his origin story, which would explain how Tony Stark was captured and made the suit under the guise of building weapons of war for his captors, when really he was building the suit to help keep him alive and also help him in his escape. This suit, of course, was built for a specific purpose, that of survival. But over the years, Tony would modify his design and improve upon it, even building various suits for specific events as might be needed depending on the circumstances. His most iconic look, though, often still involves him wearing his slightly more modern, though still classic colors of red and yellow. He went from silver to gold to red and yellow, I believe, although now he has more modern coloring in terms of the red and yellow colors. His armor appears a lot more metallic red and gold, which I love. Although I'm sure in the classic comics it was also supposed to be metallic red and gold, but we just have more advanced, I feel like, color tech in the future. Color tech. And friends, before I move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here on Top 10 Nerd, and if you love hearing about some heroes that, you know, you might not be as familiar with or you might not recognize anymore, we also have a playlist where we show you some alternate versions, so go see some other characters that you might not know about now. Number 9, Green Arrow. Green Arrow literally looked like Robin Hood back in the day. Well, minus the now more Robin Hood style goatee that he now sports, because back then I feel like he was usually more clean shaven. Green Arrow is Oliver Queen. Technically his first appearance is no longer even the same Ollie that we have today in the comics, instead relegated to the alternate reality of Earth 2. But still, he was the original Green Arrow, and so if we are talking about classic looks in terms of first appearances, which is exactly what I'm trying to do here, Oliver has made a lot of progress in comparison to his first look and his first self. Currently, Oliver Queen in the Prime Earth main continuity of DC Comics has a much more modern look to him. Well, of course, like I said, minus that classic looking goatee and mustache combo, which is very Robin Hood to me. No longer does he wear a bright green suit with red boots and gloves. Instead, he wears body armor that, while still kinda green, is much more muted in tone. And sometimes he wears reddish bracers, which is kind of a throwback to the classic look, but even then, the colors are about where we draw the line when it comes to similarities to that classic look. Well, and obviously he still fights with a bow, because he is Green Arrow, but that I don't think will ever change. That would be weird if he was like, and now I'm Green Arrow, but I fight with a machete. I'd be like, that's really random, but alright. Unless it's a machete that he can like shoot like an arrow. Number 8. Thor. Thor has always looked super classic when it comes to his Norse heritage, but now he looks even more cosmic, despite really having always been, as the Asgardians are not people from the past but are instead considered to be aliens of a kind, simply posing as gods on Midgard, aka Earth, where humans once prayed to Odin and the others. I'm sure some still do, seeing them as godlike figures. I mean, in essence, they are still considered gods, but they're also aliens, because they're, you know, cosmic, but also divine. I would say that over the years, Thor's stories and overall appearance and costume have also greatly embraced his cosmic origins more and more. Thor also made his first appearance in Journey into Mystery issue number 83, where he also looked a mite smaller compared to his modern day self. I feel like that Thor is so like, the Thor we have now is like, oh, he's like super deezed. And especially if we consider the Thor and Hulk crossover event Banner of War, Thor also hulks out here himself and even shattered the Bifrost again after becoming infected by Bruce Banner. So there he might look totally different, because you'd be like, what? Thor's the Hulk? What's happening? Number 7. Elongated Man. Elongated Man is a character whose design has been pretty consistent since his first appearance in The Flash issue 112, even now in the comics. But there was a time when his appearance was totally different, and you know, you may have not recognized him there. This happened after Ralph Dibny and Sue Dibny, his wife, died, and then they became ghosts for a bit. But not just ghosts, ghost detectives. Admittedly, as ghosts, Sue and Ralph do look like themselves, but just as civilians in a spectral form. So even though Ralph does look like Ralph, you still might have not recognized him or Sue during their ghostly appearance, because I mean, they were ghosts. It was a cool and short-lived time, and I like to talk about it because I love the idea of ghost detectives. I wish we got more of that. To check out Sue and Ralph in their ghostly forms, you can refer to issue number 52 of the 52 comic series.
And at number 6 is Blue Beetle. I will be honest, Blue Beetle kind of flew under my radar for a very long time. I either simply didn't care about him, or I just hadn't really known he existed. I don't know which one it was, but it was definitely one of those, and seeing the costume that the original Blue Beetle wore kind of makes me think that maybe it was the first option. That costume absolutely sucked. It was bland as hell, and it was basically just Dan Garrett in some leggings and an oversized shirt, a stupid looking cowl looking thing, and a bad domino mask. It was during World War II, so we're gonna blame this on material shortages, but every Blue Beetle outfit has been an improvement and redesign of this costume. But now, with Jaime Reyes, the Blue Beetle armor is not just way more advanced and capable, but it looks leagues and bounds better than the original. So much so that it's hard to even draw comparisons between the two. Now if we put these suits up side by side and change the colors of one of them, almost no one would believe that one was an evolution of the other. So much better now, thank the Lord.
Number 5. Electro. The main Electro we've known for years is Maxwell Dillon, but there is a new Electro on the scene. This new Electro is Francine Fry. She was once the accomplice and love interest of Max, who died as a result of her love for him, and her obsession with villains and kinda her lust for them. While Max's powers were less in his control, Francine threw caution to the wind and decided to kiss him. Their kiss would result in her being electrified to death. However, she'd later be revived by Ben Ben Reilly, operating as villain the Jackal, as part of a plot to help control Electro into basically doing his bidding. Turns out the DNA Reilly used to resurrect Francine in clone form was actually a mix of Maxwell's and her own as a result of that kiss, allowing her to harness and absorb electricity, chiefly the power of the suit that a depowered Max had at the time been given. Kissing Max once more, Francine absorbed the suit's powers, accidentally killing him in the process and becoming the new Electro. Max has since been resurrected, so now even more confusing, we have two Electros technically running around.
Up next, we're taking a look at Richard Fisk, now known as the Rose. The son of Wilson Fisk, aka the Kingpin, Richard would boast about how rich and powerful his father was, thinking he was just a highly successful businessman. Now, even if that was the case, like, come on, don't go around boasting about your parents' accomplishments. Live your own life. Well, that's exactly what Richard decided to do. Upon discovering his father was actually the kingpin of crime, Richard faked his own death and took on the moniker of the Schemer, attempting to take down his father's empire. The two would eventually reconcile after Richard felt bad about putting his dad into a coma. Fair enough. But this brings us to Richard's next moniker, the Rose. He now sported a purple mask and kept a rose in his front pocket and worked under his father, but secretly wanted to dismantle the Kingpin's organization from within. After killing a policeman in a shootout, however, Rose just realized he was a bad dude and aligned himself with his father again, but then changed his mind and wanted to take over Kingpin's organization again. Just kill your dad or don't, man. It's a decision we all have to make at some point in our lives.
Number 3. Grey Goblin. Gabriel Stacy has been known by a few different names throughout the years, and has also had his backstory somewhat altered. Initially, we knew Gabe Stacy as Grey Goblin, and later as American Son in Age of Heroes. Originally, he was introduced to us as the son of Norman Osborn and Gwen Stacy, who basically had a secret love affair which resulted in the birth of two twin babies, Sarah and Gabriel. However, when Gabriel and Sarah were revealed to be the mysterious demonic villain returning from hell, known as Kindred, we learned that they were actually never really the natural born children of Norman and Gwen, thank goodness, but instead were clones that Harry Osborn had made, using their genetic material to get back at his father, tormenting him and making him think the two were really his children, when actually they weren't. It was all Harry's plot, ha ha ha. Not only did Gabriel have a completely different look as Kindred, but he also got a completely different backstory that explained away all the weirdness of his and Sarah's original origins. Which, I mean, thank you for that, because wow, that was bad. It's not good. I don't want Norman to sleep with Gwen. I'm not here for that.
This next baseball player turned villain is known as Frederick Myers, aka Boomerang, and he's gone through several changes, having worked under criminal organizations like the Sinister Syndicate, as an assassin, going up against a number of heroes, and of course, Spider-Man. So how did this boomerang-wielding baddie change? Well, he ended up aiding Black Widow, Maria Hill, and the Champions in their fight against Hydra, and cut a deal to get a full pardon for all his past crimes. That's pretty sweet. He later became Peter Parker's roommate in an attempt to get closer to Spider-Man as he was attempting to find the pieces of the Lifetime tablet. Though Boomerang was lying about his true motives to Spidey, saying he was only after the tablet to keep it away from Kingpin, this was quite the opposite actually, he was working for Kingpin. Despite his deception, however, Frederick actually formed a close bond with the hero and would go on to sacrifice his own life to save him during a fight with the vampiric villain Morlun.
Number 1. Green Goblin. Norman Osborn is often known as the villain the Green Goblin, one of Spider-Man's most iconic villains, if not the most iconic rogue he happens to have in his gallery. Their rivalry is an old one, going all the way back to the first appearance of the character in the 1960s, where Osborn actually first appeared not in his civilian form, but simply as the villain Green Goblin. But lately, Norman has had a change of heart, if you can believe that. It most certainly won't last forever, or at least I'd be very surprised if it did, but currently in the comics, Norman is actually one of the good guys for a change. This is after he had all of his sins purified by the villain known as Sin Eater. Initially, Peter as Spider-Man had saved Norman from Sin Eater, but after being taunted about Gwen, couldn't help but toss Green Goblin to the villain to be devoured, which, I mean, fair enough. But instead of perishing, Norman survived the encounter, no longer driven by madness, guilt, or rage. Having been purified, he was seemingly given a new lease on life, and currently remains one of the few villains purified by Sin Eater to stay that way. At least, so far.
Number 10. Harley Quinn. Harley Quinn was created in the classic 90s Batman animated series where she was the Joker's main henchwench and girlfriend. She proved so popular that she was brought into the main comic book continuity, where she was dressed pretty much the same as she was in the animated show, with a red and black jester costume. Over the years, both her look and personality have evolved as she has broken away from the Joker and become her own person, who is a bit more of an anti-hero at this point. Although her color scheme has remained the same, she now has a bit more of a wild look, wearing a red and black corset and leather jacket, letting her blonde hair with dyed pigtails flow free. It is a major difference, but there are other characters who have changed even more, which is why Harley is at the bottom of this list. Number 9. Paste Pot Pete. Originally, Pete used a glue gun to commit robberies while dressed in this rather strange green jumpsuit and purple beret. Paste Pot Pete is really Peter Petruski, a scientist who developed an advanced adhesive that made him very wealthy. However, he believed that a life of crime would be even more lucrative and began robbing banks and stealing missiles. He updated his costume a couple times, going for a more purple pouchy theme, and ended up changing his name to the Trapster after Spider-Man burst into hysterical laughter upon hearing the name Paste Pot Pete. He made some minor updates to his look in the following years, but eventually settled on a yellow and brown outfit that he still wears in his most recent appearance. None of his looks are particularly menacing, but if I saw his first look side by side with his second look and was told that one was called Paste Pot Pete and the other the Trapster, I would have no reason to think that they were the same villain, other than both using a similar weapon. But at the same time, so do Captain Cold and Mr. Freeze. Number 8. Hawkeye. In his first appearance in Tales of Suspense number 57, Clint Barton was a carnival worker who performed incredible trick shots with arrows. When the audience was unimpressed with his performance and booed him off stage, he became jealous when he saw Iron Man show up to save the day when one of the rides went haywire, much to the crowd's delight. He thinks to himself, "I'm the greatest marksman the world has ever known, and yet they ignore me." He decides that if he makes himself a few trick arrows, he will be just as respected as Iron Man, because a guy in a purple tunic and mask shooting arrows is just as impressive as a flying weaponized robot suit. He becomes a supervillain, going toe-to-toe with Iron Man. In the years since his first appearance, Hawkeye has gone from supervillain to superhero and has had multiple identities and costumes, but in his most recent appearances, he has traded his more flashy masked look for what is essentially just a black t-shirt with a purple arrow on it and some sunglasses. Without the context of the many years of stories between his first and most recent appearances, not only would you be confused as to his very different look, you'd also be surprised at how a supervillain is now one of the most frequent members of the Avengers.
Number 7. Kane Parker. Kane Parker was initially a clone of Spider-Man who, yes, was considered to be, kinda evil. Chiefly because Kane didn't have any qualms with killing people, leaving them with his mark of Kane, which typically was used to kinda like burn the face of his victims. And also because he had long hair and was more moody than Spider-Man, which is a feat because Spider-Man's a pretty moody dude. In reality, the mark of Kane was actually just Kane using his spider climbing like little hooks on his hand, as we saw showcased visually in the Sam Raimi Spider-Man trilogy, to burn his victims' faces. Kane was also seen as evil because he was mentally unstable, having been a defective clone who was rapidly deteriorating, which basically affected his mind. However, Kane is now known as Scarlet Spider and has a completely different look and attitude when compared to his original appearance and presentation in the comics. While still being, you know, somewhat edgy because he's still Kane, he's definitely still more of a hero now in the comics than he ever was before.
The original Super Adaptoid, created by Advanced Idea Mechanics, or AIM, was originally a villain facing off against Captain America, Iron Man, of course the Avengers, also going up against the X-Men. It was able to mimic and visually copy anything it wanted, giving it a hero's abilities and powers. But in Amazing Spider-Man 900, however, Spidey faces off against a different version of this shape-shifting entity known as the Sinister Six Adaptoid. This version of the character sports a brand new look, most prominently featuring Doc Ock's tentacles, but there are other visual elements in the character's design as well. The Sinister Six Adaptoid is an amalgamation of sorts of, you guessed it, the Sinister Six, having the abilities of Doc Ock, Vulture, Kraven, Mysterio, Sandman, and Electro. The Sinister Six had been captured by the Living Brain, and their powers and sentience combined to form the villain. So if you thought these guys were strong on their own, imagine going up against all of them at once. Spider-Man actually needed help the real Sinister Six in order to take this abomination down. Go figure. Also, I love when villains like team up with the hero just to like, because they both hate the same person. It's just fun.
Number 5. Wonder Girl. Wonder Girl is great, and we don't honestly talk about her enough. But I guess what I should really say in regards to this list is the Wonder Girls are great. While initially the first Wonder Girl appeared as a younger version of Diana Prince in Wonder Woman issue 105 in 1959, I think the more common Wonder Girl we all think of when the moniker is mentioned, or at least most of us think of, I definitely think of, is Donna Troy. Donna Troy made her first appearance in The Brave and the Bold issue number 60 in 1965, and her look has come a long way since then. But also, she's not the only Wonder Girl anymore. There's also now Cassie Sandspark, and the more recent addition from the Brazilian Amazon, Yara Flor, with each of these Wonder Girls possessing their own very unique look.
And at number 4 is Daredevil. Since some of you guys hated that Amanda used superhero names that were taken up by another character for part 1, I'm gonna be a massive troll and do it again. Know why I don't care? Because the costume that Elektra dons when she assumes the Daredevil name is freaking awesome. I absolutely love this costume. It is different enough from any of Matt Murdock's costumes to make you look twice or 3 times, but retains elements that make it clear that this is still Daredevil. That point is actually a combo because Elektra has also never looked like this before either, so wham bam, there you go. Now, her time as Daredevil was honestly somewhat short, but in my eyes, it was kind of iconic. So much so that I believe her time with the costume did transfer over some elements to the most recent iteration of Matt's costume. Now he's got that sweet neck scarf hood thing going on with the more athletic looking pants. It's much more of a ninja inspired look, and I personally will take it over his classic look any day. Sorry, not sorry.
Number 3. Robin. On my part 1 for this list, I talked about Jason Todd's Robin, but many of the characters that we originally knew as Robin have changed over the years when it comes to their appearance. Don't worry, I'm not going to talk about how all the Robins are technically different people, which could be confusing to people that have read different eras of different comics. We won't do that again, although I already did it with Superman, so you might be coming for me anyways. But for this point on this list, we're going to be talking about one of the most classic Robins, Dick Grayson. I would say actually the most classic Robin. Dick Grayson was the first Robin, and not only has his look changed, his whole identity and main location has as well. Dick Grayson would eventually grow up to become a hero in his own right, Nightwing. While trained by Batman and definitely seeing Bruce as someone he looked up to, Dick ultimately branched out on his own, even going on to form the Teen Titans. Later, just the Titans, because you know, they're no longer teenagers, and leading the team all on his own as well, which is pretty impressive. As Nightwing, Dick currently tends to operate more often in Bloodhaven, a city outside of, but I believe a short distance away from Gotham, with its own crime and corruption to deal with, that in some ways makes it seem even more bleak than Gotham.
And at number 2 is Bucky Barnes. This is probably one of the biggest and most drastic changes of most comic book characters. I think the only thing that stays the same is the Domino mask. Even the man underneath the mask has changed. When Bucky Barnes first came into Marvel Comics in 1940, he was the young sidekick to Captain America with his star-spangled belt, blue shorts over top of his bread right skin-tight pants, and the stylish bright blue jacket with the yellow collar. A classic look not reminiscent of Robin at all. At least, he wasn't showing as much skin as Robin did sometimes. His outfit was at least somewhat more believable than Robin's given he was operating in World War II. But that was then. If you showed someone who'd only ever read the old stories a picture of what Bucky Barnes looks like now, they would have no idea what had happened. I mean, we got long, edgy hair, a whole lot more muscle, a pretty much all black and gray tactical look, sometimes with a face mask to cover his mouth and nose, with a hell of a lot of firepower, and oh yeah, his whole left arm is now a metal cybernetic replacement. It's a huge difference, but it goes with everything the character has been through, which is a lot. He's a much more sympathetic character, but also such a complete badass.
And finally, number 1, Ben Reilly. Ben Reilly was originally known as a hero in the comics. He is the clone of Spider-Man, who also acted as a hero and at one point was mistaken as being the real Peter Parker. For a while, we weren't sure who was the real Peter Parker. For a time, Ben Reilly was a main character we'd also follow along with in the comics. He would also go on to take up his own superhero identity, becoming the Scarlet Spider, before Kane took that name, that is. Since the old days though, Ben has become more dark and complex, even becoming known as the villain Jackal. More recently, he's become Spider-Man, but once again has fallen into the tempting pit of villainy, after literally falling into a pit of green ooze. And his look, while definitely Spider-Man inspired, is much different now, with him being known by the villainous mantle of Chasm. This name comes from the memories of Peter's that Ben lost, as well as some of his own unique memories which were also lost, which sit like a great chasm in his mind, hence the name Chasm.
So we're all familiar with Trapster, right? Peter Petruski, the incredibly intelligent chemist who fights with pretty much a high-powered glue gun as well as other adhesives? Well, there's a mysterious woman taking on his moniker. Not much is known about this new trapster, but she's actually the third person to take on this name. Cool thing about her is that she ditched the E in trapster because who needs the E? It's 2022. It just looks cooler. This version of Trapster first appeared rudely interrupting a fight between Spider-Man and Vulture, and she robbed the winged villain of money he had just stolen. This may have seemed like a good thing, but she didn't give the money back. She's now a member of the all-female crime syndicate, the Sinister Syndicate, having been recruited by Beetle.
Number 9. Sin Eater. Sin Eater is Stanley Carter. While his costume may have remained somewhat the same, actually pretty much the same, his appearance more recently in the comics drastically changed after he was resurrected by Kindred, who were actually revealed to be the twins. The twins being Sarah and Gabriel Stacy, who in turn were revealed to be clones created from the genetic materials of Gwen Stacy and Norman Osborn. So, not their naturally born offspring. Yay. Then, Sin Eater died, then was resurrected again. The second time Stanley was brought back after he'd taken his own life, he appeared in a zombie-like state, making him almost unrecognizable from his usual appearance, barring the fact that his costume has remained pretty much the same since his first appearance. Although, after rising from the grave the second time, his costume is pretty tattered, so I really think some people might have been like, who dis?
So, as we stated before, there is a new channel we have out now called Most Amazing Top 10 Anime, so if you're into that sort of thing, give us a follow and subscribe. We're putting out videos every day. This next master of the hunt is the ruthless son of Sergei Kravenov, simply known as Kraven the Hunter, the last son of Kraven. Sergei Kravenov, the original Kraven, wanted to carry on his legacy, so instead of having more children, because that would just take too long, plus he already has a daughter, he decided to create a whole lot of clones of himself, 87 to be exact, and attempted to train them in the ways of the hunt. Well, this current Kraven got his title by murdering all his brothers, which, hey, if you want to prove you're the apex predator, killing 87 clones of Kraven the Hunter is a great way to start your career, isn't it? He also saved the skulls and brought them before his proud dad. The son made his dad even more proud when he strangled his father to death while he was disguised as Spider-Man, thereby breaking his curse of immortality. The son has now taken on his father's moniker, Kraven the Hunter, as well as his actual name. Good job, buddy.
Number 7. The Riddler. Since his first appearance in Detective Comics number 140, the Riddler's gimmick has remained pretty much the same. He is hyper-intelligent and uses elaborate traps, puzzles, and of course riddles to prove that he is smarter than the Batman. His look has remained pretty consistent across media, with him wearing a green spandex bodysuit covered in question marks for much of his career. Other times, when he's feeling dapper, he wears a green suit and bowler hat. This has been his look in almost every comic, and when he was first adapted for live action in the 1960s television show, Frank Gorshin's costume felt ripped right from the pages of the comics, with him alternating between the spandex and green suit looks. When Jim Carrey took over the role for Batman Forever, it was very much the same. Even when the character showed up in Gotham, he was pretty faithful to the character's original look. However, when Matt Reeves decided to take a more grounded approach to the character in the recent The Batman movie, he had Paul Dano's Riddler in an unrecognizable style. Gone were the spandex, and in its place was a green raincoat and a winter combat mask. You know, it's funny, when I watched this movie with my parents, they hadn't seen any of the marketing, and when Riddler showed up in the opening moments of the film, it wasn't until they saw his first riddle that they realized who he was. It's a bold new look for a bold new take on the character, but if Riddler shows up in a sequel, I wouldn't mind if he went just a touch more classic with his look now that he's an established villain. I mean, there's nothing really that heightened about a guy wearing a green suit jacket. Number 6. Metallo. John Corbin was a very minor Superman villain who first appeared in Action Comics number 252 in 1959. In this story, he was a regular man who was in a car accident before being transformed by a scientist into a robot covered with foam latex which looked like flesh. He was given a kryptonite-powered heart, and he soon clashed with the Man of Steel. In his first appearance, he's just a guy with a pencil mustache wearing a suit, and there's nothing really notable about him. In fact, he dies in his first appearance. Once the New Earth continuity began, a revamped version of the character was introduced with probably his most iconic look. He was still a regular looking guy, but usually his skin would soon get torn off, and he would be seen as a menacing metal skeleton, not unlike the Terminator. In more recent appearances, he's in a more bulky mech suit with glowing green components. He is quite an underrated villain, but if you saw the current version or the skeleton version next to the original guy in a suit version, you'd have no reason to suspect all three were the same character.
Number 5. Icarus. If we compare Icarus's first appearance to his latest appearance in the comics, you'll definitely see a pretty big transformation. If we're just going with that first appearance. Icarus makes his first appearance in issue number 1 of the Eternals, and while his golden locks may stay the same, his outfit has developed a lot more since what we see him in that first issue. We see him both disguised in civilian clothes and basically potentially wearing a little loincloth and booties, if he's the man flying across the panel that I'm thinking of. I'm pretty sure that's him. That guy also has golden locks and a similar look to Icarus, or at least the attire that he is wearing has a similar look. It's pretty limited though. Icarus in modern comics, whether we're talking about Kieran Gillen's latest and greatest Eternal series or the AXE Judgment Day event, wears a lot more clothes now. Although I will admit, on that first issue of Eternals, there is a little picture of him in his outfit, so sure, but I'm more talking about what happens in the issue. His civilian disguise, the sunglasses, the hat. More recently as well, his adaptation in the Marvel Cinematic Universe has him looking quite different additionally, where he was played by Richard Madden, showcasing him as a brunette instead of the more literal golden-locked golden boy. That iteration of the character also wore more blue and gold than his comic book counterpart, who lately is often draped in blue and red colors. That's more Icarus in the comics. I guess they had to get the gold in there somewhere, you know what I mean? Number 4. The Flash. The Flash is not even the same person as he was originally. He isn't even from the same Earth either. Initially, Jay Garrick was the Flash, appearing back in Flash Comics issue number 1. Later on, a new Flash would be introduced to us, and we learned that the original Flash, Jay Garrick, actually existed on another world, known as Earth 2. Barry Allen's Flash would first appear back in the 1950s in Showcase issue number 4, and would continue to be a recurring mainstay in the comics throughout his history, up until today, where Barry is still around even now, and for many people he's still the Flash. Today, however, the more prominent Flash, I would say, currently in comics, is Barry's nephew, Wally West. That's my Flash, but you know, I respect people that prefer Barry. Wally West as well is a completely different person and also happens to look totally different in terms of his outfit in comparison to the original Flash, Jay Garrick. All in all, the Flash has come a long way throughout the character's history, and while these are just the 3 main Flashes, the Flash family would also grow exponentially over time. So while they all might not be known as the Flash, there are also just tons of speedsters who are related to the Flashes running around. In fact, we should probably do a Flash family attempting to explain video, or a Speed Force attempting to explain video. That in and of itself, that concept, very interesting. Number 3. The Wasp. You might not recognize Janet Van Dyne anymore because I feel like, well, it's been a minute since we've actually seen her as a hero in the comics. Correct me if I am wrong, because I really want to be wrong on this, as you know, I haven't read everything, but I feel like Janet has been missing for quite a while in the comics, unless I'm wrong. Which is kind of surprising, considering she was originally one of the mainstays on the Avengers. I've seen her appear as a friend to Jen and She-Hulk in her civilian form when she lent Jen an apartment, and I know she was dating Iron Man kinda recently, but that's about all I can think of when it comes to Wasp. And I mean, she's not dating Iron Man now because he was with Hellcat, I think, last I checked. What is Iron Man's dating history? It's so strange. Fortunately, Jan is getting her own solo series. Well, she's gonna share it, but you know, the Wasp is getting their own solo series. Possibly the very first Wasp solo series ever as of 2023, which seems crazy to me. I hope I'm wrong on that one. This series will be shared with Nadia Van Dyne, who is also currently known as the Wasp in the comics. Janet first appeared in issue number 44 of Tales to Astonish alongside Ant-Man, and since then has had quite the evolution when it comes to her look, ditching the Ant-Man coordinated red for a bright yellow and black suit. Nadia also is technically a totally new character who took up the mantle, so totally different person. Despite her full name, she is the daughter of Hank Pym from his first marriage, who grew up imprisoned in Russia. After escaping and coming to America, she learned that her father was dead, but Janet still lived. Bonding with her stepmother, Nadia was inspired to take up her last name instead, which she did with Jan's blessing. Also becoming known as a hero, the Unstoppable Wasp, which also obviously Janet was like, yeah, you can be the Wasp, I'm cool with it. Number 2. Green Lantern. Green Lantern, like the Flash, isn't even really the same person anymore if we are comparing modern day to classic. In fact, unlike the Flash in the main continuity event, Green Lantern has more than one modern counterpart. Who was the original Green Lantern? Well, that would be Alan Scott. Alan Scott made his first appearance in All-American Comics issue number 16, where he looked very different from our modern day Green Lanterns, and at the same time even kind of was a completely different Green Lantern in terms of, where his powers came from and kinda how they worked, at least until later on when his powers origin was somewhat retconned. The modern day Green Lantern I'm sure most would think of is Hal Jordan, but there has also been Guy Gardner, John Stewart, Kyle Rayner, Jessica Cruz, and more recently Joe Moline, one of my favorite Green Lanterns, and that's just some of the mainstays of the Green Lanterns who hailed from Earth. There are a lot more as well. We've really expanded on Green Lanterns. So now when you say Green Lantern, I feel like instead of people being like, oh yeah, Alan Scott, or oh yeah, Hal Jordan even, people are like, which one are we talking about? Number 1, Miss Marvel. Miss Marvel was originally introduced to us in the comics as Carol Danvers in the late 60s. Carol herself worked with the US military as a member of the Air Force before becoming a security officer for NASA. It was there that she would meet her superheroic mentor and at one point her love interest, Mar-Vell. Eventually, Carol would get powers of her own in the 70s, debut as a superhero herself known as Miss Marvel. Based on that first appearance of the heroic character, we've come a long way in terms of her appearance and even who she is as a person. Carol isn't even Miss Marvel anymore, having gone on to take up the much passed around mantle of Captain Marvel in honor of the late Mar-Vell himself. Although as I said, it wouldn't just be Carol and Mar-Vell that would use the name Captain Marvel. With Miss Marvel available though, Carol ended up giving her blessing for Kamala Khan, Carol's #1 fan, to use the mantle as she started on her own heroic journey. In the comics, Kamala is known as an Inhuman with the power to basically modify her form and shapeshift to an extent. Number 10, Bishop. As some of you pointed out in the comments on the part 1 of this list, a lot of 90s characters, especially 90s X-Men, have completely different looks in the modern day when compared with their 90s appearances. Lucas Bishop is definitely one such character. Although he still has his M tattoo over his eye and a few details in his costume that pay homage to his original look, Bishop has definitely seen some changes, some of which might be so great that fans may not at first recognize him. While he still often is seen with his XSE guns and even still sports a red bandana, Bishop is now a member of the Marauders. Gone are the days of those 90s X-Men colors, and modern day Bishop dresses mainly in reds and blacks, in homage as well to his role as the Hellfire Trading Company's Red Bishop. Also, I love that Bishop is the Red Bishop because he's a bishop and his name's Bishop, it's crazy. Number 9, Crystal. Crystal's initial appearance had her recognizable mainly by her ginger or strawberry blonde hair and a simple white dress. I personally always thought of Crystal as being ginger, but then I see so many different versions of her where she has like maybe blonde hair. So I don't know, but I've always thought of her as a ginger. She is known for being the younger sister of Medusa, who is the Inhuman queen and true love of Black Bolt. Crystal has had a few different looks, but generally she has longer ginger hair and is either in a yellow suit or a Fantastic Four suit when she was, on that team. She has been known for dating Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, was once married to Quicksilver and had a daughter with him, and she was even for a time married to Ronan the Accuser. Yeah, it's been an interesting dating history I feel like for Crystal. All in all, Crystal has had a sort of wild life, and while her costume has changed gradually, comparing her short blonde haired self in her yellow and black diamond suit to her first appearance with long ginger-like hair in her white dress, looks like a dress to me, and you might not know it's Crystal at first glance. And friends, if you want even more lists where we talk about all the glow ups in comics and I guess some of the glow downs, if that's a thing, be sure to let us know that you love this list by giving it a thumbs up. Number 8, Pyro. Pyro might be sporting a very similar suit when it comes to how he looked in his first appearance, but he also now has a skull tattoo. A full face skull tattoo. And honestly, I have come to love it. Not only that, but this version of Pyro was also originally known as a villain, and like many on the island nation of Krakoa, has been given a new lease on life where he no longer needs to be a villain. Instead, recently, Pyro has exclusively acted as a hero, fighting alongside his shipmates and teammates, the Marauders. During his time with the Marauders team, St. John Allardyce ended up taking refuge with his fellow teammates in a tattoo parlor. A few of them decided to get tats while they were there, Pyro included. He decided to get a full face tattoo, getting a black skull tattooed over top his face. And I gotta say, it's just been growing on me more and more every time I read Marauders. At first, after he got this tat, I was expecting, like so many other Krakoans, that Pyro would end up dying and then being resurrected, erasing the tattoo from his face. After all, who needs tattoo removal when you have resurrection protocols, and mutants dying and returning is no longer really a big deal at all. Although I'm sure the Healing Gardens could remove Pyro's tattoo almost as easily. Still, he hasn't gotten it removed or died and been brought back without it yet, so while you might wonder who that is with the skull face tattoo, it seems that it's becoming part of Pyro's modern day look quite seamlessly. So maybe in 10 years from now we'll be like, oh yeah, it's Pyro because the skull face tattoo. Maybe he'll still have it.
At number 7 is Connor Kent. Con-El is one of the many people to take on the mantle of Superboy, and it seems like his look has changed more than your average hero. He's also known to be a clone of another more real son of Superman, which I suppose leads him to run into some identity issues, which could be part of it. But he most often appears to look like this high school bad boy with the spiked leather jacket look, but he's also got the black and red supersuit, and at times has also presented a lot like the classic Superman with the blue, red, and yellow costume as well. But that's kind of my point. It's hard to know whether you're looking at Con-El or John Kent or even another Superboy from an alternate dimension, because he doesn't seem to have decided on one look, and he's pretty hard to recognize, especially these days as his time goes by. At number 6 we have Wonder Woman. Now, a couple newer comics make this hero a bit different than what we're used to. During a one-shot in 2020 called Future State, the Wonder Woman mantle is taken on by Yara Flor, who takes the place of Princess Diana while she's away for a time. Sporting a totally new costume with a handful of different weapons, this iteration of the hero just gives us a totally new look at who Wonder Woman could be. More recently, near the end of 2021, a younger iteration of Yara Flor appears in the Infinite Frontier series as Wonder Girl, offering the new status quo of what the DC universe might look like moving forward. But aside from the Wonder Woman mantle being taken on by a new character, there is another series that leads right up until the end of 2021 called Wonder Woman Black and Gold, in which multiple different art styles are employed to give us a totally new aesthetic to the Wonder Woman story itself. Although there is a continuation of the traditional Wonder Woman storyline running into 2022, there are also some alternatives to the character that have been released right up until this year that give us a whole new look into how the character could be portrayed. And at number 5 we have Gambit. Back in 1990 when the character was introduced, he didn't strike me as much of a pretty boy as he seems to be portrayed today. But now, his charm has become actual part of his power set known as Hypnotic Charm. Now, with this new storyline being dropped later this month, I can't confirm what I don't know about the official 2022 version of the character, but in recent years Gambit has changed quite a bit, at least in certain portrayals. Partly with his newer Hypnotic Charm power, but also with his abilities he acquired during his time as the Horseman of Death for Apocalypse. During this time he gains a set of newer, darker abilities that usually aim to kill, and even further, after blinding himself with an exploding card, Gambit learns how to see the future somehow, which is a big deal for a character that has always otherwise just been concerned strictly with kinetic energy and things of the like. And although these days he has renounced the title of Horseman of Death, he still might have the ability to disintegrate his targets through molecular acceleration. In his new self-titled series, however, we'll see him paired up with a child version of Storm, which will tell the story of how Gambit came to be an X-Man. So maybe the character will get back to something closer to his original portrayal, whether we want that or not, but we'll see. At number 4 is Iceman, another character that is being endowed with a whole new range to his power set. Iceman these days appears to have the ability to conjure up ice beasts on command and freeze his targets on a molecular level. Some argue that the level that Bobby Drake has brought his powers to at this point has given him status as an Omega Mutant, which is a far cry from the days he was riding ice slides and throwing snowballs. Still having these ice slide abilities at his disposal, Iceman seems to favor his god level powers these days, and for good reason. I just didn't expect the young Robert Drake from the old X-Men cartoons to have come so far as to be able to create living beings from scratch, but crazier things have happened in the last few years. At number 3 we have Magneto, who seems to have reached a new level of power these days, with his magnetokinesis now being applied to the whole electromagnetic spectrum. He gains a whole new set of abilities. As of late, Magneto has been showing off his gravity-defying powers, radiation absorption, and even light manipulation, allowing him to turn himself and others invisible. So yeah, if you didn't think that having total control over all the metals in the universe was enough, Magneto is now these days able to control light. So there's that. I mean, to an extent. At one point he even makes Dazzler punch herself in the face with her own light-based powers, which is pretty OP if you ask me, but it's still the old Magneto we've always known somewhere in there. He looks roughly the same. He's just developed quite a bit since the old days, and we're excited to see where he goes from this year onward. At number 2 we have Jubilee. Jubilee has always typically been known as a bit of a pushover, having a pretty passive power set under her belt. She was able to shoot fireworks on command, and that was sort of it. She was always a fun person and was great at distracting enemies, but in terms of sheer power, she wasn't gonna land high on a list if she was ranked among her peers. But in the last couple of years, this character has undergone a total transformation, and what turns out to be known as lumikinetic explosive light blasting is a power that could be tapped more than just creating small bursts of fireworks on command. These days, Jubilee is able to create literal explosions, sometimes even considered to be nuclear level. Not only this, but over the last couple of years she has also spent a good stint as a vampire, which just makes the character even more different from what we've always been used to leading into 2022. At number 1 we have Batman from Dark Knights of Steel. In this new limited series that is being released as we speak, if you're watching this in 2022 when it was posted, Batman is being given a total medieval makeover. Along with other DC characters, Batman navigates a medieval landscape of dragons and ancient magic, donning not only a suit of armor but a sword as well, which really takes the concept of the Dark Knight to more of a literal degree than I think any of us were ever expecting. But honestly, it works for me. These days, Batman has become a character, and a franchise for that matter, that is being openly explored through various different lenses in the comics and in the movies. And people seem to be openly inviting more and more off-the-walls portrayals of the character, no matter how different they appear from the original. And in the Dark Knights of Steel, we're seeing yet another example of this, where Batman isn't even being set in the same time period anymore. But even though he may be somewhat unrecognizable from, let's say, the Tom King series, I feel like this has become something that fans of Batman have gotten used to over the years.
Number 10, Deadpool. Deadpool has gone through phases where he was fully cured of his power set and even pretty once more in the comics, like back during Daniel Way's Deadpool run, looking completely normal but without his healing factor. But the most startling shift when it comes to Deadpool's appearance has to be between his on-screen adaptations. That's right, we're talking about the comparison between Deadpool's cinematic debut in the X-Men Origins Wolverine film and his own self-titled film franchise. Although oddly enough, both roles feature him played by Ryan Reynolds. The two adaptations could not be more different. Thankfully in Deadpool 2, Wade manages to fix Cable's temporal dial. Using this device to time travel, Wade is not only able to save Vanessa, who initially died at the beginning of that film, but is also able to clean up the timelines by killing the previous version of himself, who is also known as Weapon 11. It should also be noted that in X-Men Origins Wolverine, Deadpool appeared fully as a villain, as opposed to the lovable mess of an anti-hero we've come to know him as within his own film franchise. Number 9, Raquel. Raquel. I never know how to say this name, but I'm pretty sure it's like Raquel. How do you say Skrull names? That's the question. For some reason, probably because she had been gone so long, Raquel, aka the Skrull Empress, aka Emperor Doric VIII / Hulkling / Teddy Altman's grandmother, was completely unrecognized when she returned. Raquel was revealed to be alive and well, and also sleuthing it up as she impersonated T'Nolth the Pursuer, an elite member of the Kree forces. And apparently Apparently, Rakul had been impersonating Tanath so long she had in essence created her persona and basically was her. Rakul had actually been plotting and planning in secret, putting in place all the pieces to bring together the Kree and Skrull Empire, uniting them in an alliance in order to ensure her grandson was the one to rule over the now allied empire, as we saw in Empire. That's the name of the event, so not to be redundant. It was an empire, but it's spelled empire with a Y because it's a whole other thing. And yet when she was revealed in that event to be the one revealed as the Skrull pretending to be Tanath, many Marvel fans actually needed to crack open their comic history books and review just who exactly she was, with many people mistaking her for Veranki, the Skrull Queen. But yes, this is Rakul. She was believed to have died when the Skrull homeworld perished along with her daughter Princess Enel, as their world was devoured by Galactus. She made her first appearance in the Fantastic Four original series in issue 206 and was believed to have perished in issue 257. But she didn't, she was still alive, and then she came back years later and everyone went, who is that? What? Veranki? What? Not Veranki, two different people. Number 8. Kraven the Hunter. You might think you recognize Kraven, but do you really? After all, the current Kraven that you've seen turning up in the current Beyond storyline of the Amazing Spider-Man series is actually none other than Kraven's last son. Well, his last clone son, anyway. This clone of Kraven was given the name of Last Son after he hunted down all his other brothers, his other clone brothers, who had also been trained by Sergei Kravenov, the Kraven himself. As such, this clone of Kraven was named his true heir, and since then has also taken up the mantle of Kraven the Hunter. So while he may look like Kraven, albeit a younger version of him, this Kraven the Hunter is not actually the original. So I guess this is a character that you would recognize, but in so doing you'd be wrong, which means I guess you didn't really recognize him then, did you? This version of Kraven made his first appearance in the current run of The Amazing Spider-Man, which started in 2018, first appearing back in issue 16 as the Last Son.
At number 7 we have Doomsday. The primary change with Doomsday isn't something that's been gained, but something that's been lost. A very notable power of his actually, and that is his hyper adaptability ability. In fact, I would even argue that this was his main power, and what it meant was he could learn from past losses in battle and change his physiology to prevent himself from being killed in the same way twice. I don't know why this has been dropped, because aside from it being the defining characteristic of Doomsday, it was just a really fun ability to watch because it made every encounter with the villain a new challenge for the heroes, which would ultimately make for an exciting read. But for whatever reason, this power has basically been left in the dust, making Doomsday that much less unique from any other Bruiser type villain, at least in my opinion. At number 6 we have Dr. Octopus. Something that the less avid readers may not know about this villain is that he's been going back and forth between heroism and villainy for some time now. And not only that, Otto Octavius has recently taken on the mantle of Spider-Man, donning the superior Spider-Man armor outfitted with the mechanical arms and everything. He's also been taken over by Venom recently, as well as the Carnage symbiote. Although he's known to be back to his evil ways and his classic suit in 2022, there is no telling if he'll jump back into the Spidey suit once more. He's already gone back and forth a number of times, even in the last few years, so I wouldn't be surprised if he did it again. At number 5 is the Green Goblin, aka Norman Osborn. As if this villain wasn't enough of a contender for Spidey to deal with before, he actually takes on the Carnage symbiote, turning him into the Red Goblin, as mentioned before. This makes him nearly unstoppable, forcing the good guys to employ anti-venom on him in order to take him out for good. And even though he has since gone back to being the Green Goblin, the character takes another turn that makes him unrecognizable from his past self during the events of Kindred Rising. And by unrecognizable, I mean that he's now working with Spider-Man. When Sin Eater cleanses Norman of his sins, his allegiances change and he becomes a hero. At number 4 we have Doctor Doom. These days, Doctor Doom has taken on some pretty unstoppable powers that some would even describe as being godlike. Big fan fans of Victor Von Doom might have expected him to reach a point like this at some point because of his insatiable hunger for power, but as of 2022, he's already surpassed at least my expectations of what he was capable of. Although they haven't stuck around until the time that we're posting this, he has taken the powers of the Silver Surfer and even the Beyonder, giving him a whole new mantle of God Emperor Doom during the Secret Wars storyline. Just for scale, this gave Dr. Doom the ability to piece together broken pieces of the universe after the multiversal collapse. And that's a pretty crazy glow up if you ask me. And even if he doesn't hold quite that much power these days, having had that ability has changed the character forever, if you ask me. At number 3 is Darkseid. Originally introduced as a nearly unstoppable supervillain and one of the most powerful in the whole DC universe, Darkseid's powers have been dumbed down quite a bit since then. Although he appears the same, his immense power level just isn't the same these days as it always was. For example, his eye beams were originally meant to kill his targets in one hit, but these days, they don't by any means take out their targets in one hit. He used to be almost unbeatable, but it seems like heroes are making easier work of him than ever as of late. This is probably a result of him appearing more often in the comics, because if he'd kept his same unstoppable status, his appearances would have to be regulated, or else our heroes would be out of commission in the blink of an eye. At number 2 is Anti-Monitor. Another case of a villain getting nerfed. Anti-Monitor's gotten it bad these days. If you thought Darkseid got taken down a notch, just think how much room there would be to do the same with Anti-Monitor, because he is, after all, the most powerful being in the DC multiverse. Just to get an idea of what I mean, back in the day, Anti-Monitor takes out multiple universes alone before he reaches ours, and then once he does, it takes a hell of a lot to take him down. In fact, it became one of the most notable moments in all of the DC comics when they did, because it was so difficult. But when he returns from his defeat and joins the Sinestro Corps, he just seems to be in a totally different echelon of power, a lesser one, to the point where the Justice League can take him out on their own these days, which is just weird to see for fans who knew his power level back in the day. At number 1 is the Batman Who Laughs. Enough with the downgrades, because this guy's change is a glow up if I've ever seen one. These days, the Batman Who Laughs has gained so much power that he's known to be basically godlike, and he finds these new powers in the place that he comes from, the Dark Multiverse. After finding a Dr. Manhattan powered Batman in the Dark Multiverse, the Batman Who Laughs gets his mind transferred into the body of that hero, acquiring the greater part of Dr. Manhattan's abilities, but with the sinister touch of his usual self as well. The only way that he's able to be taken down is when Wonder Woman finds a way to match his power level herself and defeats him despite his insane power boost. At number 10 is Despero. Although Despero has always been totally jacked, he was originally known as more of a threat to the Justice League through mind manipulation. During the Silver Age, he would only typically use his telepathic powers before anything else, but these days, it's a different story. Although these changes did start to take place way back in the 80s, the character has come a long way since the days when he would sit on his throne and twiddle his fingers most of the time. Now, he seems to do a lot of the grunt work himself, even looking larger in size these days than ever before. And even outside of the comics, Despero's appearance in the Arrowverse offers a totally different look into the villain. He takes on a human form for much of the time, who is, well, let's just say he's not as big as Despero, nor does he have much musculature to him, no offense to that actor. Nor does he have a third eye or anything that a comic book fan would expect, and when he's in proper form, he just seems a lot less demonic and cunning, more like Hellboy's very serious detective older brother, or something like that. At number 9, we have Anton Arcane. The penultimate villain to Swamp Thing, Anton Arcane has always been a threat as one of the most prolific evil scientists in all of DC. But when Swamp Thing finally kills Anton during one of their many confrontations, back in 2016 I think, the villain goes to hell and basically becomes a demon. Having been a pretty tame foe for most of the Swamp Thing comics, Anton Arcane's physical changes have made him almost unrecognizable now that he's a demon. And what's worse is that he continues to bother Swamp Thing and his niece Abigail, but now with the added demonic powers in mind. So he's changed quite a bit, both in looks and power set. At number 8, we have Psycho Pirate. The way that this villain has changed since the Infinite Crisis event is unmatched. Although he looks relatively the same, he's gained such a power boost that he now works with the likes of Darkseid and Alexander Luthor. After surviving the crisis, he comes out on top, getting his hands on what's known as the Medusa Mask, and what this helps him do is basically summon beings from the old multiverse, which, as you can imagine, is a very powerful ability, especially directly following the event itself. And even though he's been killed by Black Adam during the events of Blackest Night, Psycho Pirate's corpse is brought back to life as a Black Lantern. And as you can imagine, this gives him a whole new look and increases his power level. He loses the Medusa Mask in this ghoulish form, but even without it, he appears totally different than how we're used to seeing him.
Number 7. Flash Thompson, or as he's currently known, Agent Anti-Venom. Still, it's pretty wild to think that Flash Thompson, aka Eugene Thompson, started out as Peter Parker's bully back in the day. Flash has come a long way from being an antagonist to a friend of Peter's to a full-on war hero and later superhero. He's battled alcoholism, became an amputee, and even traveled into space where he fought alongside the Guardians of the Galaxy. If you only knew Flash from his first appearance, or vice versa, you only knew him from modern day comics, you'd probably be shocked to see just how different the character is, how far he has come, and how much he has grown and evolved. He even became such a popular character among fans that he got to join the Resurrection Club, being returned to life recently after dying during the fight against Red Goblin. Number 6. Cable. In recent years, Cable has had a completely new look, considering that his old version died and was replaced with his younger version. Of course, his older version has since returned, but there was a good amount of time there in the comics when you might have been confused as to just who exactly you were reading about. Is Kid Cable meant to be Nathan's son, you might have thought, or is he some like de-aged version of Nathan Summers? Well, the latter is the correct assumption if you made it. Young Cable actually hunted his older self down, in essence completing his time loop. But of course, the old man still existed out there, and if you went to the right point and place in time, he would still be living earlier portions of his life. As such, we were able to bring Old Man Cable back in the comics, and young Cable actually realized that he would also have to leave and let the old man basically take over, as while he thought he knew it all, young and all, that's what young people usually think. They think they know it all. It turns out he still has lots to learn. Honestly though, I love both versions of Cable, and I wish that old Cable could team up with his younger self on more occasions. I want like a Kid Cable and Old Man Cable team up comic. Number 5. Speedball, or as he was known for a good amount of time in the comics, Penance. Robert Baldwin initially got his powers after a lab experiment went awry. After being exposed to extra-dimensional radiation, Robbie found that when he was the target of a certain amount of force, his body would transform. Instead of him being harmed from said blow, he would produce a protective barrier, causing him to become basically like a human bouncy ball. He could use this energy to then shield others, blast opponents, or to even halt speeding projectiles in midair. Speedball would later join the New Warriors. However, later on, he would be part of an incident at the center of the First Civil War, where 612 civilians were killed, including 60 children. This would prompt him to change in appearance and in mindset, becoming Penance, a spiky armored version of the character who had internal spikes in his suit to remind him of all the victims lost, as he felt personally responsible for their deaths. Speedball has since returned to his original appearance, but it has taken him time to recover both physically and mentally from his time as Penance. And he's kinda still on that road to recovery. He was Penance for a long time. Number 4. Angel. Angel is another mutant superhero who has gone through a ton of different looks in life. Most notably was his shift from having organic wings to techno-organic wings after he lost his organic wings when he became one of Apocalypse's horsemen. The crazy thing is that while Angel seems to appear as mostly his original version, there are times where you might be confused with him as to who is who, as he seems to kind of alternate right now in modern comics between his original form and his techno-organic form, Archangel. As far as I can tell, this hasn't been fully explained yet in the comics, though it has been acknowledged that this happens in a similar manner to his X-Corp partner, Monet. That is, when he gets more emotional or gets more angry, his techno-organic form seems to come out. This was alluded to at the end of issue 2 of X-Corp, their Hellfire Gala issue. And if there have been more explanations on this and I missed them, please feel free to tell me what issues I should in-depth read, because yeah, I feel like there's little details, but we haven't gotten like a full, here's how it is, let me break it down for you. Number 3, Nick Fury. While Nick Fury does look very different in modern day comics in comparison to classic comics, it is important to note that technically these are 2 different characters. Well, technically these are kind of like 3 different characters. Or 4 different characters. There's a lot of characters. The version of Nick Fury we saw in the MCU was actually inspired by the version of the character from the Ultimate Universe, who, fun fact, was also inspired in terms of appearances by Samuel L. Jackson, the very man who would end up playing him. In fact, a lot of the MCU characterization and even stories are inspired by the Ultimate Universe, the alternate reality of 1610, and the stories that went on there. The original Nick Fury of Earth 616 was actually a white man, but he would inevitably be replaced by a 1610 inspired alternate Fury after the original Nick Fury of 616 ended up kind of being transformed into a Watcher. The 1610 version of Fury and Samuel L. Jackson's take on the character would then be adapted for Earth 616, the main comic book continuity, and that's how we would get Nick Fury Jr., who is the son of the original Nick Fury from the comics and looks a lot like Jackson's 1610 inspired version from the MCU. See what I mean? There's lots of Nick Furies. People are like, Nick Fury changed, and I'm like, Nick Fury didn't change, there's just a lot of characters that came together. Number 2, Beast. Beast is one character that has gone through a massive amount of change since we first met Hank McCoy, the lovable vocabularian, scientist, and the X-Men's most bouncy team member, Beast. Back then, Hank was just a relatively large man with enormous feet and enormous hands, but his mutation continued to progress long after that first appearance, changing when he ended up forced to take a serum that he had created based around the hormone that causes mutation. As such, he mutated even farther, which became permanent after he didn't take the antidote quickly enough to thereafter revert the effects. This meant that Hank was now permanently even more muscular, agile, and now completely covered head to toe in gray fur. From there, his fur would become more blue, and over the years his appearance has become borderline lion-like or even kind of cat-like at times. Number 1, Star-Lord. Considering how much Peter Quill has changed with each era of comics, it could be hard for fans to recognize him in modern day. Once again, his appearance and power levels have changed so much. In his initial appearance compared to his modern look, he's basically unrecognizable. And if we go even farther back to the Peter Jason Quill of the 1970s, the Star-Lord of Earth 791 now, he is completely different. It should be noted though that shortly after the main continuity version was introduced in Thanos issue number 8, which came out in 2004, he was shortly after pretty radically changed when he appeared a few years later in Annihilation Conquest from 2007 to 2008, which is pretty much the version of Quill roughly that we have today. Although even then, he's still changed quite a bit. Quill more recently in the comics returned from Marinus, an extra-dimensional world where he lived unaging with his friends, partners, and his lovers, Mors and Aradia, for hundreds of years. He came back even more powerful than before he had left, and ended up joining forces once more with the Guardians of the Galaxy to defend the cosmos against the return of the Dark Olympians.
At number 10 we have Dreamer, or Dream Girl, who doesn't quite resemble the way she used to appear in the original comics. That's because in the CW series Supergirl, Neuronal is now Nia Nal, and aside from her costume making a decent change, the character is actually quite different as well. Most notably, Dreamer is known to be the first transgender superhero to appear on TV, played by Nicole Maines, who is herself a transgender activist. But that's not all. The character is also quite a bit younger, and I mean, her hair isn't even blonde anymore, which I think is fair to note. She doesn't look quite the same. But either way, from the name change to the costume change to even an entire color palette shift, Dream Girl, now Dreamer, has metamorphosized into someone completely different. At number 9 we have Elongated Man. Not the most widely popular superhero to begin with, Elongated Man takes a rough turn in the Arrowverse when his costume is entirely reimagined in The Flash in one of the worst ways possible. Although he's sort of played off as a joke character in both the comics and the Flash series, it's still sad to see such an unimaginative portrayal of any hero really. Although Ralph Dibny is mostly out of of costume, he becomes known to be the worst dressed within the narrative of the show as well, throwing more oil on the fire of Elongated Man's memeability. But even aside from the costume, the character just appears much less boisterous than he typically does, with a younger disposition and somehow a down-to-earth vibe, even though he's Elongated Man. At least in the way that he appears serious while he's in costume, a total departure from the goofy, exaggerated image associated with Elongated Man in the comics. At number 8, we have Swamp Thing. This newer version of the character from Infinite Frontier is just insane. With the new host Levi Kamei, Swamp Thing takes a whole new turn in how he's presented. Well, not entirely. To be fair, Swamp Thing has always kind of been this big, nasty green monster, but something about this modern depiction of how the green takes over Levi's body turns what used to look like a big green beast into a massive green spaghetti monster, it looks like. An extremely terrifying spaghetti monster, to be exact. Although the character doesn't appear for long in the short-lived series, this is the most recent update we have on the Swamp Thing, and he's surely taken on a different vibe than he used to.
Number 7, Xemnu. Xemnu made his first appearance in Journey into Mystery in issue number 62. We learned that Xemnu was actually a prisoner and a criminal who was retrieved and accidentally revived by a human and electrician named Joe Harper. Xemnu would go on to become known as Xemnu the Living Hulk, and would also prove to be a powerful cosmic, psionic, and all-around bizarre enemy to the Hulk and the Hulk family in time. Initially, he clashed with the original superhero powerhouse team known as the Defenders. Xemnu in his first appearance has brownish or reddish fur, but currently has reappeared in the comics with white fur, making him look kind of like a space yeti. You may not recognize him because you forgot him, or because he's just so weird, or it could be just because of this change when it comes to, you know, his overall fur color. But yeah, he's got different, I guess he dyed his fur? I don't know. What happened there? Number 6, Norman Osborn. Well, you might currently recognize Norman Osborn in terms of his appearance. When it comes to his actions and his alignment, you might not. And in modern comics, Norman has also gone through a couple dramatic redesigns and makeovers in recent history. At one point, Norman gets plastic surgery to completely change his facial appearance, reinventing himself as Mason Banks and becoming the head of Alchemax. There's even an unmasked point where we were all kind of like, wait, who's that? And then he's like, I changed my face, but it's me, Norman Osborn, aka also Mason Banks. He also has been the head of Hammer and his own Dark Avengers, and for a time posed as their version of Iron Man, tarnishing the mantle of Iron Patriot. And more recently, a depowered Norman bonded with the Carnage symbiote, allowing himself to use the Goblin Serum once more, but ultimately being driven insane by that whole experience and believing himself to actually be prime Carnage host and serial killer Cletus Cassidy. Now sane again, however, and seemingly purified by the Sin Eater, currently in the comics, Norman is on a path of redemption, having gained a new lease on life and being cured of his usual villainous intentions. Or so it would seem. I never trust Norman, but that's what's up currently.
Halfway through into number 5, Green Arrow. Haha, you knew this was gonna happen. The Arrowverse crossover event Crisis on Infinite Earths had been in the process of setup for a while, with the previous Elseworlds crossover just being one big commercial for it basically, and the seasons leading up to it revolving mostly around what could happen in Crisis. One of these issues was the death of Oliver Queen, which shockingly was carried out in the first part of the crossover. After bringing Oliver back to life at the Lazarus Pit on Earth 19, John Diggle, his daughter from the future Mia, and Constantine all traveled to Purgatory to retrieve his soul. But when he was about to go back with them, Jim Corrigan arrives with a way for Oliver to save everyone. This turns Oliver into the Spectre, basically the most powerful being in the multiverse, giving him the powers of a god, allowing Oliver to reboot the universe with the help of the Paragons, and also stopping the Anti-Monitor from securing the destruction of all Earths. He also ended up corrupting the Speed Force by empowering Barry, which resulted in the Speed Force dying for a time, which is a whole other can of worms I won't discuss. But needless to say, you wouldn't recognize this version of Green Arrow, especially since he's dead and you can't really see him. And at 4, Black Lightning. In Dark Knights of Steel, Superman finds his way to a medieval Earth where familiar DC favorites are recast in the Middle Ages. Batman is a young prince and John Constantine is an oracle, but perhaps the most unique transformation is that of Black Lightning, who now is a king, pursuing a mysterious agenda against Superman and his family. The character has not been regularly seen in the comics for some time, but returns in Dark Knights of Steel, which has got to be my personal favorite favorite Earths so far, because medieval, Cheese King, you get it. This time, Soups' parents actually made it to Earth along with him, and in the Kingdom of Storms, Kal-El's birth has triggered horrifying visions in a young John Constantine. As Constantine lays writhing on the ground, his mind is overwhelmed and he's dictating his visions to the royal scribe. The king arrives and readers see that it's Black Lightning. He's concerned over Constantine's visions and tells the scribe to write down everything the boy says. As Constantine comes out of his trance, he tells Black Lightning that the end is near. This is a pretty damn badass version of Black Lightning, similar to Black Panther in a way, since now Jefferson is rightfully a king. Respect. Getting close to the end, in at number 3, Wonder Woman. The Dark Knight's death metal story wrapped up early 2021 with issue number 7, and in that issue and the issue before, we see Wonder Woman at her most powerful, in a godlike form that's even more powerful than a god. As the comic puts it, quote, "She has been a god before, but at this moment she's more. At this point she has ascended past godhood and can see all of time and all realities. Okay, she sees like every Earth's timeline, and she faces off against the Batman who laughs in his most powerful form as well. This fight is so intense that they hit each other through time itself. Diana here is charged with anti-crisis energy, a connective force that links all history and all lives as one story. Then she moves on to become one of the hands that created the multiverse going forward, with no walls and greater possibilities. She aids in creating the future state story we see in the next issues, and what was seemingly the centerpiece of DC 2021. So Wonder Woman becoming a god and remaking the universe, while very Oliver Queen as Spectre, still a pretty damn dramatic change. Penultimately, in at number 2, Dreamer. Nia Nal, also known by her code name Dreamer, is a fictional superhero from the Arrowverse television series Supergirl, portrayed by Nicole Maines. The character is based on and is depicted as an ancestor of the DC Comics character Nora Nal, also known as Dream Girl. She debuts in the 4th season of the series, and Nia Nal is the first transgender superhero on television. In March 2021, it was announced that Nia Nal would feature and make her comic debut in a story written by Maines to be published in a Pride-themed comic book anthology on June 8th, 2021. Mostly you won't recognize her because she was a character really created by the show, even if she was intended to be a present version of Dream Girl. Nia Nal's powers include precognition and astral projection. On July 21st, 2018, trans activist and actress Nicole Maines was announced in the role at the show's San Diego Comic-Con panel. It was also confirmed that Nia would become the superhero Dreamer and that she is an ancestor of the Legion of Superheroes member Nora Nal. Maines described Dreamer as having this ferocious drive to protect people and to fight against discrimination and hatred. She's the superhero we need right now. The character is the first transgender superhero on television, and honestly, I think that it was worth it for this list. And finally, in at number 1, Batman. Batman in Dark Knights of Steel, a new limited series from DC featuring your favorite heroes and villains as medieval knights, has made a load of changes to the character in this world. One of the biggest changes being to Batman. Bruce is the knight assigned to protect the king and queen of House El, as well as their son Cal, like how Link was assigned to protect Zelda in the story Breath of the Wild. However, he seems to be more than just a mere man, able to withstand a banshee cry, in this case being Black Canary's cry. When it really should have killed him, he only bled from his ears. Even he was confused and worried that he had magic inside him, so he told Jor-El, who came to Earth along with his wife and son before Krypton exploded, that he should be banished for their sake. That's when, spoiler alert for the first issue, it's revealed that Bruce is really the result of an affair between Jor-El and Martha. So Batman is now part Kryptonian, while also basically being a Witcher. Oh wait, hold on, okay. He's ostracized because he's a bastard, and now he's secretly part Kryptonian? Yeah, Bruce Wayne is literally a Witcher, confirmed. And at 10, Jim Gordon Batman. In the wake of Batman's apparent death against the Joker, plans for a new Batman were discussed, with Powers International laying the groundwork for a Batman-inspired task force. Their first candidate chosen to model this program was Jim Gordon, of course, who was initially hesitant to fill Batman's shoes, but eventually agreed. Going through intense government training and getting surgical muscle implants, Gordon was given the first model of a new Batman robot armor, which he nicknamed Rookie, and took to the streets as the new Batman. By complete chance, he ends up finding Bruce Wayne and informs him that he's taken up the reins as Batman. As Gordon hears several different reports about Bruce Wayne being found dead throughout Gotham, he works with Batman to figure out that a Batman from an alternate dark universe, known as the Batman Who Laughs, is the one responsible. Tracking him down, Gordon seeks help from his estranged son, James Jr. However, another dark version of Batman arrives and introduces himself as the Grim Knight. But it's certainly jarring to see Batman go from like this big bulky hero to the lanky and, sorry to say, old Jim Gordon. He even looks fragile. And at 9, Wonder Girl. Yara Flor from the tribe of Amazons from the Amazon is the new Wonder Woman in Future State, who, in the absence of Princess Diana, came out of obscurity from the heart of the Amazon rainforest in Brazil to protect man's world from the magic that is within it. Yara Flor is a demigod who hails not from the island of Themyscira, but from the Amazon rainforest in South America. She has a faithful winged steed, Jerry, and along with her friend Kapora, a forest guardian spirit, Yara travels to the underworld to rescue one of her Themyscirian sisters from the clutches of Hades, the Olympian god of the dead. Yeah, a sister that she's never even met before. Yara is also an active member of the Justice League, although the new rules of the Justice League forbade fraternization amongst its members as a way to protect them individually and not have to go through the same tragedy that resulted in the dissolution of the previous League formation. Wonder Woman and Superman, John Kent, ended up becoming friends. It's also worth noting that despite always willing to work with her colleagues in the League, she's not happy to be a part of it. And at 8, Superboy. Now this seems like it's cheating since there are multiple people who use the Superboy mantle. However, the one that had the most makeovers has seemingly been Kon-El, otherwise known as Connor Kent, with an E, because they're not cool like I am. If you read one version of Connor and then read a couple series later, you might not realize what's been going on. This man has gone through more looks than any teenager getting ready for a date in a Disney Channel movie. Not to mention the time where he merged with Spider-Man, after Spider-Man somehow defeated him. Superboy was created by Project Cadmus using Kryptonian DNA, intended as a replacement for Superman, who died fighting Doomsday. Artificially aged to his mid-teens and implanted with the equivalent of a high school education, Superboy was set free by the New Boys Legion before he could actually be implemented with safeguards to control him. One of the boys gave him a leather jacket before he set out to the city, where he had his first encounter with a villain when he found Sidearm attempting to steal money from an ATM. But since then, he's gone through like 2 other costumes and a load of different centuries, the most recent version coming from like the 30th century. So, yeah. And at 7, Hippolyta. Hippolyta is the queen of the Amazons and ruler of Themyscira. She is also the mother of Wonder Woman. In the Harley Quinn animated series, Queen Hippolyta first appears in the episode Bachelorette, after being enslaved by Eris, who takes control of Themyscira and turns it into a spa resort, planning to sell it to Lex Luthor. However, Harley Quinn discovers her plan and along with her friends takes down Eris and saves the queen and Themyscira. To thank them and celebrate their victory, she throws a rager. And in Something Borrowed Something Green, the queen appears as a guest at Poison Ivy's failed wedding to Kite Man and the old Gotham corn factory alongside some of her subjects. But the queen of Themyscira being mind controlled, that seems fairly ridiculous, okay? Even if she was mind controlled by the goddess of Discord, at that point, she might as well have just been able to tell us what games our friends were playing, okay? Harley Quinn, like they discovered her plan and took her down as a part of her bachelorette party for Poison Ivy. But if they could do that, how could Wonder Woman's mother not fight her off? Seems kinda lame. And at 6, Wally West. Wally's lightning color has shifted based on various circumstances before. After escaping the Speed Force, his energy shifted from yellow to white due to his connection to the Speed Force growing stronger. And Wally's lightning later evolved to an indigo blue cosmic energy, and this was most notable when he united with the Mobius chair, learning his children were inhabitants of a new dark multiverse Earth created by his own fears of losing them, an Earth that Tempest Fugonaut was now tasking him with destroying. Wally spent one last day with his kids, spending a nice dinner with them and giving them one last kiss before deciding to make his move, knowing what needed to be done. So he forced Tempest to promise him to get his kids to the Earth once he acted, leading Wally to sit on the Mobius chair and obtain its knowledge and power. The new godlike Wally just watched stuff and then just kind of destroyed everything. But he also realized that the chair was now infused with the power of Dr. Manhattan, and he could just do more than just sit and watch. Yeah, an omniscient Flash? That's pretty traumatic.
Number 5, Killer Croc. We got our first look at Waylon Jones, aka Killer Croc, in Detective Comics number 524. In this version, he had a medical condition that gave his skin a rough, scaly appearance, earning him the nickname Killer Croc. In his first appearance, Croc is actually pretty cunning, being able to rise almost to the top of the Gotham underworld. His physical appearance is also pretty tame, being gray and scaly but still clearly a human being. As he made subsequent appearances, not only did he get dumber, but his look became more and more exaggerated until he eventually looked like an actual crocodile, with green scales, sharp teeth, and sometimes even a tail. His size in the original comics is large, but still within believable human proportions, whereas at this point, he is so tall that it's hard to imagine any skin condition resulting in a villain like Croc. Number 4, the Green Goblin. Arguably Spider-Man's greatest foe is the Green Goblin, first appearing all the way back in Amazing Spider-Man number 14 1914, the Green Goblin had a pretty consistent look for most of his career, sporting a purple and green costume with a horrifying, grinning goblin mask with a purple hat. He flies around on a bat-shaped glider and throws exploding pumpkins at Spidey. Over the years, Norman Osborn has had a few different aliases and therefore costumes, such as the Iron Patriot and the Goblin King, but it's usually not long before he's back in the green duds. More recently though, he's trying to be a hero and is wearing a white and gold bodysuit and going by the name Gold Goblin. The glider kinda gives it away, but based purely on the costume, would you think this is the same guy? If that's not different enough for you, just take a look at the Green Goblin in the Ultimate Universe, where he is more like a Hulk than the classic villain. Number 3. Victor Fries. This classic Batman villain was very different in his first appearance in Batman Volume 1, number 121. He was a scientist who suffered an accident that forced him to wear a specialized cryosuit that kept his body temperature below freezing. He soon began committing crimes not as Mr. Freeze, but as Mr. Zero. His original look was a green and pink bodysuit with a bubble-shaped helmet feeding him cold air. When the character was adapted for the 60s television show, he was renamed Mr. Freeze, and this name eventually was brought over into the comics. His look began to evolve closer to how we now know him, but he remained a rather C-list villain until the 90s animated series revamped his origin to be a tragic figure trying to find a cure for his sick wife. This interpretation was so popular that it was also brought into the comics. The character is now very different from his original appearances, but it is interesting to see how much he has changed over the years due to his adaptations in other media. Number 2. Catwoman. I know, there are a lot of Batman villains on this list, but that is mostly because they tend to be a much more consistent group of villains than a lot of other heroes have, and also because they're the best comic book rogues gallery by a country mile. First appearing all the way back in Batman number 1 in 1940, Catwoman was very similar to her modern personality, being a brazen and flirtatious cat burglar. In this first story, however, she doesn't dress as a cat, but instead uses various disguises to steal a jeweled necklace from a boat and is simply known as the Cat. In her next appearance in Batman number 2, she is still not wearing a full-on costume, but is referred to as Catwoman for the first time. When she shows up again in Batman number 3, she finally gets a costume consisting of a long flowing yellow dress, a red cape, and a literal cat head mask. In Batman number 35, her costume evolves more into something that we today would recognize as Catwoman, with a purple dress, green cape, and less intense cat mask. The look stayed the same after that for a few decades until the comics took some inspiration from her look in the 60s TV show, and she ended up in the skin-tight catsuit that has evolved into the look we all know and love today. Number 1. Thunderbolt Ross. For most of his history, since Thaddeus Thunderbolt Ross first appeared in Incredible Hulk number 1, he has remained pretty much the same. He's an angry mustachioed general obsessed with capturing or killing the Hulk. He stayed this way for decades, being a constant antagonist in the Hulk stories, but the status quo changed in 2008 when he joined the group of villains known as the Intelligentsia, who helped transform Ross into the Red Hulk. Since then, Red Hulk has been both villain and hero, but if you saw the original Ross next to the Red Hulk, you would have no reason to suspect that they are one and the same.